tour of Sydney without talking about our famous 20-handle lock, which usually has a vendetta against me because I'll talk about it bang on midday, when the worst time is talking about it only 3 hands, so he's got 2. But anyway, there are 2-minute hands on our clock up there, 1 red and 1 black, the black hand being 11 minutes behind the red. And this clock is a rare survivor from the advent of the railways. Prior to Bristol being linked with London by the Great Western Railway, England was split up into many different time zones, each dependent on when the sun went up and went down in that part of the country. But after the land was unified by the railway, we were then also unified under London time, under GMT, or as it was originally known, under railway time. And local populations differ. So they asked for clocks to be manufactured showing both local time and London time on the same face. And here we have a rare survivor showing London time 11 minutes behind Bristol. Bristol time, sorry, 11 minutes behind London on the flat hand. And it's appropriate to find this clock still operational here in the city with our independent spirit. We've hung on to the old time zone. But it can be quite a dangerous clock, especially as a subscriber even at midday, because you could easily find yourself running from Bristol time, glance up, and go on for 10 minutes. However, if you find yourself 10 minutes late within the city, you can always hold out an excuse of saying, no, you're 10 minutes early, we run on Bristol time here, we adjust your watch accordingly. We don't really, so when you try that with a traffic warning, if you get desperate, give it a shot though. Yes, so there's our Bristol time. Anyway, now for the bit you will be waiting. Let's go and see the show. So we're about to head into the basement. I'll just point out before we do so that we're not entering a National Trust property with a lovely reception desk and the rest of it. There could be anything behind the store. I give it a brief once over before we start, but there may be the odd bucket or ladder to be warned, but it should be pretty safe. Yeah. Here we go.
Yeah.
Just a dust mat. Original varnish, clean once a month, kind of smell. Right, wonderful. We're now going to head down here. Again, it's just 2 little sets of steps. They're concrete, they're very safe, but just watch yourself. Get your phones ready. You could be the first to capture Margaret on screen. Yeah, here we go. Margaret! Sorry, guys! Put your knickers on!
Wow. Sandbags. Yeah. Oh. I like that. Oh my god. Wow.
Okay, costume change time. There we go. Okie doke. Huddle over here for a moment. We're going to start with this table. You guys might want to swing around here a bit now. You guys might want to swing. So, welcome to the basement. Technically, we're not yet in the air raid shelters. For reasons that I'll describe, I think this room may have been used during the raids as well. But officially, the air raid shelters are beyond that doorway. And when we pass through that threshold, you will see 1940s brickwork, you'll see glass doors, we've got ARP posters still in place. So that was the safest part of the basement. And you've definitely been in there during the heavier parts of the raids. However, that's also where the ladies' toilet would have been found and the gents. And with up to possibly 175 people in here, I think if you could, you'd have been as far away as possible. So this room, I think, may have been utilised as well. But where we are right now is technically the City Valuers Bar. The City Valuers are a very old institution. They occupied the basement and the first floor, which we'll look through later, finish up by walking through. It was down here that they had their strong rooms. And if you had your eyes open walking in, you might have noticed a very impressive safe door there. I forgot to turn the light on, as it sort of rushes mine. But there's a safe door there with a triple lock, and there are more in the basement. And it would have been documents relating to the city's past. The valuers were involved with buying and selling any land or buildings that belonged to the council. And they were so well established that they had their own bar, this one dating until the 1950s. So, as I say, I'm envisaging this becoming more of an established museum, and that section, you can imagine, is 1950s, 1960s, and this being wartime. We'll be talking about the 60s, obviously, when we go upstairs, and that was during the mid-1960s, and this bar, although no longer in use for the city valuers, would have been here. So although there's no way of proving it, there's also no way of disproving that the Rolling Stones, The Who, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and all the rest of them may well have had a quick pint down here before their gig. You do the maths. Teenage Mick Jagger upstairs, fully plumbed in bar down here. Anyway, we'll get to that later. Most of this memorabilia I have personally collected. A lot of it's come from the M-Shed, eBay, various sources. Some was found in the building and has been here for 80 years. I mentioned the City Valuers Department. Check this out. It's one of the absolute hidden gems that I personally found in the room you passed through on your left there. City Valuers Department, wartime medics kits. And I've got a bit of wood holding it up here because this crease in the back's been kind of fossilised into it, slung in the corner as they moved out basically in the 1950s. Within that bag were these. Boots' own brand. Boots made the ARP, the Air Raid Precaution Medics kit, and obviously the City Values kit. So Boots' own brand mine dressing. The shell dressing, large and small, that came out of there as well. And Boots' own brand, oh so gentle sounding, bleach ointment. Yeah, not going to sting at all, that is it? Whack it on. Had a specific purpose though. If you read the small print, for neutralising splashes of mustard gas. Just the odd splash. And there's gas ointment there as well for rubbing on your eyes and trying the bandages that they didn't come from that medics kit. Gas was the big fear. Memories of World War I were still very present, and obviously gas was a terror in the trenches. But thankfully it was never used. So these were never used. This you'll all recognise as a gas mask. This is actually the civilian duty gas mask, so this would have been for guys in uniforms like my own here. And this has the special attachment for a telephone. Make a little phone call on. But yes, this 1939 edition, Boots made the lenses, Dunlop made the rubber, and this early edition had a very well thought out asbestos filter.
Wow.
Probably not in hindsight the best material to use in your gas mask, but they weren't used. That's the duty gas mask. You and I would have been issued one of these. This is an original. It's got the cloth covering, but you were issued a cardboard box and that's your civilian gas mask. Very well preserved one here. A bit more practical. And we all remember COVID, of course, who get with the vaccine rollout and wearing masks. Imagine the infrastructure involved in getting one of these to every single person in the country. You couldn't leave your house without it, which is why these covers were made, to give it a bit more durability. But you're in big trouble if you left without your gas mask. But as I said, they were not needed, thankfully. We're all familiar with the eerie drone of the air raid siren from the war. The gas masks weren't needed, and neither were these, so we're not familiar with this sound. Any idea what this is? A rattle, ARP 1941 stamp, this one. This is a gas rattle, basically a football rattle. But if gas had ever been used, again, guys dressed like myself have been walking around the street doing this. Cover your ears possibly, because it's designed to be loud. So, thankfully not a familiar noise from the war. So gas wasn't used. These most definitely were. This is a replica incendiary bomb, designed not to explode on impact, but to set on fire. And the idea being that these would get stuck in your gutter, down your chimney, set your roof on fire, and it was those fires which provided the targets for the second wave of high explosive bombs to come in. So very important to put them out if one got stuck in your roof. And these were designed with a magnesium shell casing. You probably remember your chemistry lessons at school, burning a little magnesium strip, how violently that white flame burns. Imagine a whole shell made out of magnesium. Again, I've had someone on the tour who remembers Grandad springing into action when one of these came through the bay window in Bristol, set on fire on the floor. He picked it up with a shovel, took it out to the garden. By the time he got to the garden, it had burned through the shovel.
Wow.
So yeah, burnt very violently. Here's a tail fin, an original tail fin, and if you look very closely, the rivets have all been pushed up where it impacted, and this kind of pushed into it. But they weren't impossible to deal with. All you had to do with an incendiary bomb was cover it with sand or water, obviously. And you might have seen in old 1940s photographs of the street, you'll see sandbags around street signs and lampposts. And it hadn't occurred to me until I started to think about this. But those sandbags, they weren't protecting the lamppost, of course. They were there as a store of sand. They would be there with a shovel in case incendiaries started falling. Anyone passing by could dig in and start covering them with sand. And to do that, you had one of these. This is a Red Hill scoop, specifically designed to hold a big chunk of sand to put out the incendiary. And then obviously there's the famous stirrup pump, which really just gave a little jet of water. You'd be better off just chucking the bucket over. But nonetheless, thank you, Margaret. That ventilation. When we get museum funding, some of it's going on the new ventilation system. There's a substation there, it's on and off intermittently. But nonetheless, these incendiary bombs, they've provided the inspiration for a brief little historic dramatisation to set the scene before we go into the shelters. Give you an idea of what was going on with in the minds of some of these people, who they might have been. And researching this part of the tour, I found a book called the Bristol Blitz Diaries, well worth a read. Very harrowing accounts, a lot of them, so be warned, but fascinating. One particular diary entrant was called Joyce Locke, and she gave very vivid accounts of what was going on in her family life. And Joyce threw up this social dilemma that I'd never considered before, because you'd think you'd want to get as far away as possible, get out of town. People did. They went to Kingstown, they went to Ashton Court, they huddled in the fields, obviously without fires, awaiting the raid to finish. But if you did that, who was going to fire watch your roof? Who was looking out for incendiary bombs? If you came back and your house had burnt down, or your house had set on fire, set next to a neighbour's roof on fire, the street had been targeted and destroyed, you weren't very popular when you returned. So what do you do? Do you stay or do you go? And Joyce had a particular circumstance with her uncle, who was a farmer in Wiltshire, saying, come and stay on the farm. And mum and dad were saying, oh, we can't because the Joneses, they'll grumble. What if we get bombed? But I think that's kind of a good basis for some period drama somewhere down the line. Anyway, I've used that to set the scene here. And I've tweaked that story. In reality, in the diary, Joyce goes out to her uncle's farm with her cousin, her mum and dad stay in Bristol. I've tweaked that story to have Joyce fire watching on the roof of the Corn Exchange. And young guys and girls, they did this. They were stationed on the roofs of civic buildings, schools, hospitals, factories, looking out for incendiary bombs. And I've got Joyce up there on the night of Sunday, November the 24th, the night of the first major raid in the city centre. So Joyce is up there, shivering. It's late November, probably grumbling, saying, oh, I could be in my uncle's farm, I could be warm in front of the fire. Dad says I've got a fire watch, this is rubbish. There's not been any bombs anyway, it's not going to start like this, load of rubbish. And she'd have been grumbling up until about 6 p.m, at which point she would have started to hear the ping, ping, ping of incendiary bombs started to rain down over the old town. 12,000 incendiaries were used that evening, setting the medieval old town ablaze. So Joyce would have sprung into action. She'd have grabbed her Red Hill scoop, put sand on any bomb she could have seen, maybe kicked others off the roof, until hearing the inevitable deep boom, boom, boom of the high explosives now starting to fall. 2,000-pound bombs destroying the heart of Bristol. At which point she would have had no choice other than to run down here and take shelter amongst friends, colleagues, strangers, awaiting, the all clear bell. I've got to ring that one. It's basically a school bell, but you'll see it's inscribed ARP. The all clear bell to ring out. And she'd have had quite a wait. That particular raid was 6.5 hours long. Wow. The longest on Bristol was 12 3/4 hours. Half a day of bombing. Unbelievable. Wow. So I'm thinking, what would she have been doing for that time? Well, turns out Joyce was the daughter of a dressmaker's, Locke's dressmakers on Park Street. So I'm thinking maybe she's down here with a pencil in her pocket, but no paper. So maybe she starts drawing on the wall. Maybe she draws some fanciful designs of ball gowns, projecting forwards to a future when she can wear them once more. So maybe that's a scene that I'm imagining taking place that fateful evening. So if we now head through to the actual air raid shelter, guess what we might find on the wall?
I didn't realise that for me. Wow. Imagine using that.
Step back in time.
Wow.
And keep swinging through. I can bring you guys back down. Gabriel, I can bring you back down with the camera. If you want to keep squeezing in, if you squeeze it in. So, as I mentioned, from this point on in the... Oh good, that's only the battery, isn't it? Yeah, nothing problem. From this point on in the shelter, you'll notice this 1940s brickwork, reinforcing doorways, and you'll notice these green metal glass doors. They are original, making this the safest part of the structure. So during the heavier parts of the raids, you definitely would have been here. However, as I pointed out, and you will have noticed, we are also next to the ladies' lavatory, just around the corner. And this is original signage. It's never come down. 80 years that's been in place. And I guess it's just the nature of the building. War finished, council business started. We've got to get some storage down here, we've got to do this. No one had the time or the inclination to either take it down or preserve it or do anything. And it's cracked here, you could basically breathe on that and it would fall off. And I have cold sweats thinking about a lot of this space, and particularly the drawings we're about to look at, because at any point a contractor could have just ripped it out. The door has also been used as a dartboard at some point in its life. Hopefully not the same time that it was a toilet. You don't want to leave the dart in the middle of your head.
So that's dart scores, not other scores?
These are probably dart scores, yeah. And impossible to know the dates. But this is wartime, the coping around the edge of the door, as is the dado rail. And the dado rail I find particularly touching because I think that was an effort to make it feel that little bit more homely. These posters are not original. Amazing what you can do with a bit of tea. And neither's the woodwork. I've personally reinstated all this. If anyone really needs a seat, there are seats through there. I'm not a carpenter, basically, so if you're desperate, sit down, but they may or may not take your weight. But yeah, have another little look when we're walking out. Oh, we've got a light now. That's an area shelter light here. That would have been outside the shelter. You had an ID card for your local shelter, and there weren't enough shelters for the population. That's why Anderson shelters were handed out and things. But that would have been outside a public shelter, shining white if it had space and red if it did not. But yeah, I think it would have been a mean warden to turn anyone away, but you know, they had a capacity. So head through, and very excitingly, we now have a gramophone. Okay, this is much louder than you think. Okay, huddle round. This really is a highlight of the tour. Come and have a look at this. Here we have one of Joyce's drawings, possibly. Obviously there is no way of knowing the provenance of this image, no way of knowing who made it, but it is assumed, with a lot of theory behind it, that this was done during an air raid. Firstly, if you look carefully, you can read Myrna Loy, and anyone with a strong wartime Hollywood film knowledge will recognise Myrna Loy as a Hollywood movie star from the 40s and the 50s, and this looks just like her. These dance moves and the style of the dress are very 1940s as well. But basically, why else would it be there? None of the council workers have spent their afternoon doing this, and it's almost impossible to fake that kind of authenticity. But what a miraculous survivor, such an ephemeral link to those fateful evenings. Yes, I put this in front of it because this is why I had cold sweats. This was full of Christmas lights, this whole area. At any point, that could have gone. And yes, it is a nice link to Bristol's contemporary status as the capital of street art. Maybe it's Banksy's great-grandmother starting the family tradition, putting a bit of graph on the wall. But also, this is really poetic. This dreaming here above it. So it's dreaming of Myrna Loy, maybe. She was a stunner. Also, as I mentioned, I'm an artist in my other life, and I've done a lot of drawing from life in cafes, people who aren't posing, they're going to move. And these little sketches here are very clearly done from life, in my opinion. These are done from other people these portraits of other people in the shelters. It's like half a nose, half an ear, the person's moved. Yeah. So there's one person, if you look very carefully, who's asleep.
Is that a horse?
Sorry?
Is that a horse?
Yeah, there's a little horse there, and like a caricature. But yeah, I think there's a person asleep in there. But what an amazing survivor. This is an incredible survivor up as well. An ARP poster saying this area is strictly prohibited, dating this glass door. That brickwork is 40s as well. And there's an even better preserved poster this way. That's the whole of the side of that 78. That's the whole thing. You play about 4 and you've got to replace the needle. And actually, don't say we haven't got attention to detail. This is not just any gramophone, this is an HMV gramophone. And the logo from HMV is the famous dog called Nipper, who's a Bristolian dog. If you're up on Park Row, you'll see a statue of Nipper. He was a dog at the theatre on Park Row, and someone that worked at the theatre, his brother was an artist, and he made this image, and he called it his master's voice, and then HMV got onto it and used it as their logo. But yeah, I'll need to replace that needle after 2 minute plays. If I come through here and check out this fragment of poster while you're at it. Yeah, you might also notice these paraffin heaters. These have been down here since the war. You could accuse me of making a bit of an assumption there. I found them down here. However, when you walk back through, you'll see one that's been pretty much brand new, which came from eBay, and I know the date of that one. And then after picking that up, or whatever I paid for it, was clearing out that back room and found 3. And they're so rusty, they're easily of that period. But I know the date of the one that was purchased, so they are almost certainly.
You never used to do it in the 60s.
Well, there you go, and there's that the stove as well that came out as well. So here, if you can huddle in, you guys might want to come through. Space for everyone if you want to come through. This is another ARP poster and one of better preservation. It's only half there, so you have to assume a bit of it, but it's quite easy. Says something like, City and County Notice, users of ARP Public Area Shelter, provision of hot food and drink, probably. It's not possible for a recreational mobile canteen to operate within the ARP shelter. Users of the shelter must make their own arrangements, bring with them food and hot drink. Department of Food, I think, 1940. If you're very pernickety, you'll also notice that I made a mobile canteen round the corner, breaking this very rule. But again, what an amazing survivor. Any of those Christmas lights could have just scraped that straight off the wall. Another original posters here, the no smoking sign. Signed Josiah Green, Town Clerk. If you're in the Amshed Museum, a lot of their wartime stuff is signed Josiah Green, Town Clerk. I don't know how he got anything done. Seems to have just spent his whole he spent his war just signing everything. Another link to his style of tagging. But no, that's definitely period, although it's been moved to that location. And here you'll see the original entrance and exit. And remember back to when we're in the glass arcade and the yellow Prime Minister sign, there's a staircase here which now goes to nowhere. That would have been emerging next to Prime Minister. So that's where you'd have been running in and out. And again, my inner artist is touched by these pencil marks scoring out and wondering what was going through that person's mind as they're making an actual exit sign to an actual air raid shelter.
How far below ground are we actually?
Not that far. I mean, you've got that flight and then the glass arcade.
So a direct hit they would have been close.
Direct hit on the building, depending on the size of the bomb, but yeah, I mean, you've been in trouble, but an unexploded bomb, all string of incendiaries went through the roof here. But yeah, I mean, you'd have wanted to be here more than anywhere else, rather than in between a doorway somewhere. If you look through in that direction, you can see more 1940s brickwork in some cubicles. They're the gents' toilets. We can't go through, unfortunately. If we could, right at the end, where you're underneath All Saints Lane, at that part of the basement, the level changes. You've got some steps, and the stonework's much older. And it's thought that that side of the basement is made up from the original coal cellars from the merchants' houses that were here before the Corn Exchange, so pre-1743. And again, there are staircases which go up to nowhere, and they're really atmospheric. They're wood-panelled early Georgian staircases, but cut off by the footprint of the Corn Exchange. And that's my theory as to how Margaret got stuck down here. She's an early Georgian serving maid. Her route back to the kitchen's been cut off. She's trapped down here for eternity. Cast iron fact. Interestingly though, Margaret was the most common girl's name during the 1940s. Up here, we have a link with an earlier period, and that's the first period of the building. You might be able to see a PS and 1794 scrapes in the wall. The building was finished in 1743, so 51 years later someone scratched that up there, dating that lime plaster. And yeah, as I've mentioned, we're going to finish up by skipping forward to the 1960s. As you can probably see by now, layer upon layer upon layer of history, not just in this part of town, but in this one building. If it could talk, the stories it could tell. No, that's Margaret's bedroom. Through there is a storm drain which blocks intermittently and is rather annoying. Nothing, it's another just part of this basement really. But it hasn't got the brickwork, so I don't think you'd have gone through there as part of the shelter. Indeed, we'll come back through to the bar and we'll talk about the 60s.
Wow. It looks like tightly faded for me. Oh, this lights definitely don't like me. Wow. No, it was... Sorry. It fell down then. It's not too bad. Chelsea. Chelsea, did you notice all the suitcases underneath?
Yeah.
Not what they are now. Oh, gone.
Thank you.
I mean, in there, there are around 4 other area shelters you can visit in the country, but most of them are kind of dug in, like Dover's dug into the cliffs, Stockport's dug into the clay. This one, I think, is, along with the cabinet war rooms, the best preserved. I do genuinely think it. So, you saw it here first. And we've got the rock and roll stuff to get through. And just before we do, I'll point out that Keep Calm and Carry On poster, because I like telling that story. Everyone's familiar with it. Upstairs we've got Keep Calm and put the washing on or whatever in the kitchen. But during the war, no one would have recognised that poster. It was never used. It was designed in case we were invaded. There's an Operation Sea Lion invasion map on the wall there, replica. And that was the Germans' invasion plan, but they lost the Battle of Britain, they couldn't invade, so those posters were never rolled out. But they were printed, but never used. And then it was a printer in Edinburgh who found some in the late 90s, had a long copyright battle to be able to use them, and then they were first rolled out in the early 2000s. But now they're kind of part of the national psyche, but actually it's quite a recent thing. Anyway, we will now skip forward 20 years to another incredible period in the building's past. We're about to finish up in front of the Exchange Hall, where you'll find it today full of traders selling lots of wonderful, huge variety of local goods. It was obviously designed for the merchants to trade in. Only in the last period of the building's life did it become a corn exchange. Local grain merchants when the international trade collapsed, when the empire crumbled basically. But the corn traders moved out in the late 50s, and for the first time the exchange hall was empty. Until Uncle Bonnie, of Uncle Bonnie's Chinese rhythm and blues and jazz club fame, rather dubious sounding outfit there, moved in, took on the lease. Not every night of the week, I think it was Tuesday, Wednesday was Uncle Bonnie's. And yeah, there was an Uncle Bonnie's in London, one in Brighton, now we had one in Bristol. It wasn't the biggest venue, Coston Hall was the very biggest, so bands like the Beatles, the Beach Boys, never played upstairs. They were a little bit ahead of the game in terms of their rise to fame. But such unknown little outfits as the Rolling Stones, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Cream, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker, just read the poster, and Spencer Davis. It's a hell of a lineup. Cilla Black, Lulu, all trod the boards right upstairs. They didn't serve alcohol, but famously served crocodile sandwiches, chicken probably, and it was the place to be. Got another lovely diary entry from 1966. Went to see Who at Corn with Dina, Jill and Ginny. Fabby, Roger, fantastic. Roger was marvellous. Wore maroon woolly stuffed bells, black velvet belt, hipsters, striped shirt, cravat tie. His hair was like flaxen corn. Literally, and it is though, if you look at it, it literally is. And very tan skin. Didn't notice his socks. We've got a very particular type of personality shining through them. Stupendous. Keith, also gorgeous. Drawing of Keith Moon with his t-shirt there. And that's who wrote the diary. But yeah, living memory. These faces are still walking the streets. And as I said, feel free to picture any of those bands, probably not that far, because it definitely happened. There's no way of disproving it. I'm too honest. Basically, the south side of the Exchange Hall was the Green Room. We've got Mike Tobin here from Mike and the Magnettes. He's a local Bristol band. He put together this this board for the 275th anniversary. And Mike told me that they got ready. And I was like, yeah, so did you come down here? He's like, I don't remember it. They got ready on the south side of the arcade. Mike was on the same billing as Johnny Hooker. Evidently, Johnny Hooker didn't say much. The only thing he said all night was to Mike and his band, and he said, "You cats is cool." That's the only thing he said all night. But, yeah, they were getting ready upstairs, but they could well have been. But let's go and take a closer look.
So, wow.
Yeah, we can come back then. Okay, keep making your way up.
Oh. Wow.
Okay, so Reg, did Reg scare you again? Okay, so the medieval part of All Saints Church there. So we're going to head this way. Oh, you sensing something?
Apparently there's an obvious between up here and the chairs would go across the room because the floor was so.
You know someone who was in an office?
Yeah.
You were personally?
I know, it's a friend of mine.
Ah,
Who recently been up here.
oh, quite likely, yeah. Okay, well done, Dean. Okay, so we used to take a peek in some of those rooms, but I was just saying to, sorry, I didn't catch your name. to Kelly as we're walking around. I feel quite house proud walking around here. The council's cleaning budget is not huge. It's got 40,000 square feet for one poor girl to try and keep on top of. Yeah, it was just closing doors and things as I was walking around. But we used to go into these rooms, which were empty up until quite recently at the front on the north side. They overlook Corn Street, if you want to get your bearings. And they're quite grand inside. And we'd go in there because they'd often been featured on film. City Hall have now moved apartments in there, and to be honest, as you're probably already feeling, there's enough to see. But basically, anywhere you see a block colour in this building has been used on screen. And as you're walking down the corridor, you'll notice some green block colour at the beginning, and you might have also noticed that it's a bit grimy in places. However, if you take a closer look at some of this grime, not all of it, but some of it, take a bit of a closer look, and you'll find out that it's actually a paint effect. These have been aged and weathered to look better on screen. And this particular paintwork was put on the wall in 2019 for the filming of the trial of Christine Keeler. Was used at the beginning of this year for the filming of Alex Rider, Anthony Horowitz's Kids Spy series. This was the Maltese Embassy office for them. And there's some images there when it was used as part of the Netflix War of the Worlds series, but it's still the same paintwork. So yeah, some of this grime is original, but a lot of it is actually paint. So we'll finish up in the rather imaginatively named Long Room.
Wow, that is a really long room.
Well, we were actually already in it. That partition's more recent.
Wow.
Yeah, it's why we come up here to have a look at that view, really. Yeah, and you can see the top of All Saints Church with the flames in stone. I mentioned the church burnt down, so there were all those kind of chalices with flames in the top. Keep swinging around and you'll see this view. So yeah, we're now in the Long Room. This is a later addition to the building. We'll skip right back to the start now. Remember, we were talking about our nails, and so trading traditionally was taking place outdoors. That's the way we did it in England. We traded outdoors, on the barrels, on the nails, open air. So when John Wood the Elder designed this building in 1743 and incorporated a roof, controversial continental roof, the merchants were up in arms. We don't want a roof, we're English, we trade outside. So they finally built it without a roof. This is the Exchange Hall. We're looking down into there through this window with the roof now in place. This is how it was originally constructed. This is where Mick Jagger then played a few hundred years later. And this beautiful photograph must be earlier than 1872 because the roof's not yet been built, and it's got two lovely fellas with their stovepipe hats propping up against a pillar there. So, no roof. Great idea when it's summer. As soon as autumn, winter arrives, and you have Spanish, Portuguese, Italian merchants in Bristol trading in horizontal sleet, they all said, "What on earth are you doing?" and went over to the commercial rooms, into the coffee houses. The merchants weren't using the building. It became a joke, a national joke at Bristol Council's expense. You built this building and it's not being used. So 1872, they finally built a roof. And here we have a watercolour showing what that scene would have been like. So we now have this spectacular Victorian wrought iron and glass roof. And holding up the roof, we have these arches with these lovely ladies in between. And these are the arches we're looking through, and those are the lovely ladies. We've got a photograph here, a couple of photographs, giving an even clearer idea of what we've lost. So this roof was on top of these ladies. You can guess what happened. 24th of November 1940, string of incendiaries went through, unexploded bomb, lost the roof. Say it was unexploded because the interior survived, but the roof did not. And it was really quite a thing. If you follow the angle of these supports, the pinnacle, the top of the roof, was said to be higher than the Corn Exchange. And when we finish up in a moment's time, I'll point out the roof today. It doesn't look terrible. It kind of looks like it's meant to be there. But the roof that you'll see in a moment is that height. We've lost that, we've lost that, we've lost that. We've possibly lost 5 times. I mean, you'd have come to Bristol to see this site. And yeah, the logic is completely inexplicable. 1949, this roof was constructed at the feet of these lovely ladies who were designed to hold a roof. Why? Nobody knows. So, along with a few council workers, you are the only people in Bristol to have seen these carvings. This one in particular is quite interesting, the Egyptian style lady. Egyptology was very fashionable at the time. The suspension bridge in Clifton, both ends actually resemble Egyptian temples, and Brunel actually incorporated sphinxes either side. But it's probably never going to be seen again. It beggars belief. Why? Someone theorized the other day that maybe this roof was designed for somewhere else, and with wartime austerity, they thought, oh, that kind of fits. We'll use it here, but why you do it? No idea. Anyway, there are other odds and sods, some of which come from the basement, some of which has come from Blaise Castle, actually. But this fella's just briefly worth pointing out. This is Samuel Morley. He was originally at the other side of All Saints, of St Nicholas Church, sorry. He's now in Lewins Mead. He was just round the corner, and he's worth pointing out because Morley was quite an unusual figure for the time. He was a politician and philanthropist, and he left money, or gave money during his life, to build farms, the Canadian side of the US-Canada border. And the purpose of these farms was to welcome in escaped slaves. If you managed to break free from your plantation, made it all the way up through America into Canada, you were a free man or woman, but had nowhere to go. Morley built farms for them to live and work as free men or women. So quite a progressive figure. He also heard a lecture by a guy called Josiah Henson, and Henson himself was an escaped slave, and Henson toured Europe telling his life story. Morley heard it, said, that's so good, you've got to write it up. Henson's biography then became the inspiration for the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. So yeah, he's now on Lewins Mead, and he's the plinth up from Colston, so there's a kind of tale there in itself. Another gem from the basement has to be this poster. A Royal Navy poster, advertising for 3 men. If anyone can explain how that makes sense, please do. But they want 3 men to join up to participate in a rather obscure little war we had with Spain called the War of Jenkins' Ear. Yeah, I hadn't heard of it either. A Spanish galleon took an English merchant ship. The captain of the ship was called Jenkins. They chopped off his ear, and we declared war. It was a brief little spat. And the poster reads, volunteers will receive monthly pay, and the volunteers themselves will have a bountiful supply of clothing, beef, grog, flip, which is like an alcoholic eggnog type drink, and strong beer. So that's 3 types of booze in the bribery, and also a certainty of prize money, absolute certainty. As the men enter for this service will be sent to capture the rich Spanish galleons, and the S is like the old F there. And in consequence will return loaded with dollars and honours to spend their days in peace and plenty. Huzzah! So it's been written by Boris Johnson himself. You couldn't make it up, could you? It's an absolute gem. And that's from 1796. We know it's 1796 because if you Google Blackburn J. Waterworth printers, that poster comes up. So in theory, it was delivered along with a load of others to the post office next door, made its way in the exchange, was never used, got shoved away. Someone's recognised it at some point, don't know the date of that frame, but someone's framed it. And yeah, it may never have left. So again, layout upon layout of history. Oh, another board from the 275th anniversary shows Mayor Laporte Street, our friend the chef at the beginning of the tour. There's Mayor Laporte Street, same bridge before it was bombed. There's an illustration of the Merchant's Tolsey with a lean-to over it, but still outdoors with the nails in front. Another shot here, for Bristolians especially, this is quite interesting. This is Mayor of Port Street. So this is where our friend the chef was later on. But you're in Castle Park here. You're kind of in between the Bank of England building and Norwich Union House, the two banks in the corner. But you're in Castle Park, looking out. There's High Street, there's the back of the Glass Arcade. So that's where Matea's kebab shop is, on High Street. And there's the back of Jones's, so that's where the chef is cooking. And it just shows you how densely packed these old medieval buildings were. Newspapers, Felix Farley, Bristol Journal, 1818, again from a drawer downstairs. The suspension bridge had been started but not finished when that was printed. There's one from 1816 here. You can always tell, like little borrowers, council staff have been through having a look. Yeah, 1816 on that one. You might have noticed these tables, the wooden tables scattered around. These are the corn traders' tables. As I mentioned downstairs, the building started out as the Exchange, it then became the Royal Exchange. This was the international trade. Empire crumbled, the Exchange Hall only then was used by local grain merchants. Only the last period of its life did become a corn exchange. And these are the corn traders' tables and their signs. These ones dating from right the 1950s, the most famous of which being Rankovis, who still have their factory over in Avonmouth. So yeah, it goes on and on and on. So I can hear some tummies grumbling, so let's get you downstairs. I'll show you where the stage was and you can go and grab your lunch. That was used by BBC during the war for their communications.
But it was also used as a public area shelter, wasn't it?
Yeah. BBC was about halfway up. Okie doke. Right, so come here first. Have a look at this. That's the roof we got today.
Wow.
Doesn't look terrible, does it?
No.
Kind of looks like it's meant to be there, but you know what should be above it. And imagine the height. Seeing it now, imagine 5 times that. The first measure the council took before putting the 1872 roof in was to actually install a tavern that side and a coffee house this side, at least to try and keep the merchants in the building. So above the tavern we have Bacchus, the Roman god of wine. So if we've got Bacchus above the tavern, who do we have above the coffee house? We have, any guesses? Costa, close. We have Caffeina, the Roman goddess of determination, energy and wit. Java is another coffee goddess. So that can be your take-home pub quiz fact, Caffeina. That's where the stage was, in between those two pillars. Tiny little stage, really. I've got some photographs, the best ones that I could find. It's hard to get images, and especially ones that will blow up. This was kind of the best one I could find, which shows a band called The Move, who went on to become the Electric Light Orchestra, doing their thing in between those two pillars. And then here we have the unmistakable figure of Mick Jagger strutting his stuff. I think it's a Christmas concert there. And then we've got very youthful looking Keith Richards and Brian Jones. Brian Jones, it is said, fell asleep in Exchange Avenue after a gig, or maybe mid-gig. Exchange Avenue doubled up as the gents' toilets, so if poor old Brian was falling asleep year 1 or 2 of touring in a public urinal, maybe it's not surprising it ended the way it did for him, unfortunately. But I'm sure Mick and Keith, especially as they've just had their 80th birthdays, would raise a wry smile in the knowledge that where they were performing as kids, in between the two pillars, you will now find the Bristol Rock and Fossil Shop. A nice circularity to that. If you go and see Johnny at Rock and Fossils, then he will happily point out the various chips in the pillars which have been made by various famous guitars smashed against. But yes, do head on through. The glass arcade is through the door where it says more stalls that way. Go and grab some lunch. There are various places you can sit down as well. If you're heading in and want to know, come and ask me. If you want to know anything else about other areas we've talked about, most of you are Bristolians, so don't need directions up to Clifton or places to go on the harbour side. But any Malaysian participants who want those hints and tips, fire away. The only thing that remains is, firstly, did I mention TripAdvisors? I've printed some cards with a convenient QR code on the back. I don't know much about QR codes, I think it's some kind of witchcraft, but that'll take you straight in. Please do leave a comment, they are very, very much appreciated. For the rest of you, if you can just form an orderly line underneath the Red Baron's triplane, completely insweatable Red Baron's triplane, of which there is no link to Bristol whatsoever. I'll try and grab a member of the public and we'll get that photograph. And if you're very, very lucky, it has been known for Margaret to appear. Oh dear. My phone, I've just found out this morning, is so full of photographs. I went in the phone shop to, that would be great. Went in the phone shop the other day to do a phone upgrade, and she said, oh, so why is it so full? And so it's mostly photographs, take a lot of photographs. And she goes, no, I take a lot of photographs, and I've got 16,000. I've never seen anyone more than 16,000, and my phone's not full. She went, oh. We've got 31,000. So thank you, Gabriel. If you can take that.